Welcome to Rob's Country for this week. We're going to be looking at Aoraki Polytech and how they've moved with the times to basically catch up and to lead as far as education is concerned with respect to agriculture, horticulture and every other sort of culture. We're also going to be giving you a very careful warning and a very sound warning, in fact, if you are employing people from overseas as milk harvesters or whatever, because there's a hook in there that you will need to know about. But first up, dirty politics. There were those who would say that it's totally bulldozed, avalanched, in fact, over everything, and we're not getting policies and shudder.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes for the interaction between politics and the media in this country. I think that both are the thing. You know, what I've heard in terms of reaction to dirty politics is somebody go, it happens all the time. Others are horrified by what's going on. I guess the reality is somewhere in the middle. And I think that the media has a responsibility to hold everyone in public life to account. But for politicians, it's more to do with policy. Let's stop talking about the sort of peripheral stuff. Because in the end, what a politician might do, what they might tweet, what they might say, is nothing like as important to you and me as the policies they implement.
And what's going to go into our pocket all come out of it.
And that's the policies drive that. Yeah. And so whether it is the tax we pay, or the money we make, or the activities we pursue, the policy framework influences that far more than who's talking to who and who's saying what.
John, I think the feedback I've been getting from the majority of people is that they just turn it off, bang. And you know, either that or they get up and walk out, or they throw something at the television screen.
I absolutely agree, turn it off, but drive the media, drive the politicians to focus on what's important to you and me, not the stuff that's not important to you and me.
But God, how do we turn the media, that monolith, around?
Well, I mean, you guys in the media have got
television presenter.
You guys in the media have got that opportunity, and I think, you know, CTV, TV, radio, print, even the internet has all got a responsibility to try and focus on the stuff that's meaningful rather than the stuff that's just entertaining. You know, turn to the entertainment pages if that's what you want, but when we're talking about business and when we're talking about politics, stick with what the core story is.
Real people's lives.
You know, everyone is impacted by what the politicians do in policy. Maybe not about who they talk to and who they phone and who they text, etc., etc.
Gotcha. The economy.
Well, things are not going that well. We've seen the shine come off. We've seen dairy prices down. We've seen log prices down. We've seen the projected payout down. So the sort of rock star might not be quite as attractive as it was in the past. And we've seen an absence of response from the currency. And so it's difficult right now and predicted to worsen over the next few months. We've seen the mortgage battle starting again with the banks, even though the Reserve Bank is giving the signal that clearly we are on a tightening phase. And so we sort of, oh, this is 2006, 2007 all over again. And we wait to see what that's.
Can you just recap on 2006, 2007?
I'm sorry?
Can you just recap?
Well, you remember, it was mortgage battles, it was low-cost mortgages, it was as much debt as we could eat, and everybody was having a party. And then we hit the global financial crisis. And so we are seeing softness around the world. Markets are soft. China's soft, logs, milk powder. From Australia, the hard commodities, the demand is falling from China. Europe is difficult. The US remains difficult. So it is still, there's still a few headwinds out there.
You would be suggesting we don't get positive gearing into our lives again?
I am suggesting that we should all be de-gearing. I think, and that in itself will depress the economy. So as we all pay down debt, we'll see the economy contract as a result of that. I think John Key said a line similar to that about 18 months ago. Clearly, when people are paying down debt, there's less demand in the economy.
But I mean, remember the big crash, the big Wall Street crash, when everybody was hardy geared and they were borrowing.
Oh, they still are.
Shares.
We are getting close to pre-crash levels even now in terms of debt gearing. So the world isn't really fixing itself. What's happened is that the private sector has de-geared, but the government sector globally has re-geared in order to step into the gap of the Keynesian stimulus effectively. So governments spend because companies aren't spending, and that keeps the economy up. But ultimately, the stimulus has to be limited. And when we talk about the I can't remember the exact number now, but it's something like $60 billion a month that the Fed is pumping into the system in the US, and that's money created out of essentially thin air.
Okay. What should we be doing? You said we should be getting rid of debt.
I think, if you think, take the average dairy farm, we're on Rob's country after all, and say, well, if you're carrying the average $3.5 million debt, if you can pay that debt down, think about debt as the distance down the branch from the tree, and then closer to the leaves you get, the more leverage you've got, and you're more susceptible to winds, you're more susceptible to the elements, the economy around you. As you move closer back to the tree stump, you're less impacted. So by reducing the amount of debt that you're carrying in your farm business or any business, you insulate yourselves from the slings and arrows of the weather, which the economy throws at you. And so it's reducing that leverage, reducing that debt becomes a key issue.
How important is it, you as a manufacturer and exporter, that we look at niche rather than commodity, because we're heading towards 2050 and double the amount of food needed on half the area?
Well, niche is important. Why is it important? If I'm a niche producer, I can have a bigger say over price. So I can maintain a better price, say in the US or say in the UK, than if I'm a commodity producer, because I'm basically, with a commodity, by definition, it's the same, milk powder is milk powder is milk powder. And so it's price that all that matters, because it doesn't, I could say cement is cement is cement, rather than, move it away a little bit. So if the things don't change, the only thing you can play on is terms, delivery. Price is not a variable because the market sets the price. As soon as you move into differentiated product, then you can charge a bit more for it because it's special, because it's different. And so being able to specialize in your product better focuses the overall market strategy to take more money out of the market, which means you can live with 88. You can live with 84. You still start to struggle at some point, but
this is the sense in the dollar.
This is the sense in the dollar. Yep. So the cross rate, we always talk about 88, but it's really, right now, it's 2 New Zealand dollars to the pound. It used to be 3 New Zealand dollars to the pound. So for every sale I make as a pound in the UK, I now get 2 New Zealand dollars. I used to get 3. And so that really makes a difference. If you can't lift your price, then your margin suffers. And that's one of the problems that's happened with farming. The argument has been that the currency will come down when the commodity price falls. It hasn't. So we're higher today than we were in January, a cross rate to the US, even though in New Zealand dollar terms, milk powder's off 45%.
John, thank you.
Bit of a worry.
Yeah, it is a worry. We've got more for you on Rob's Country straight after the break. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Well, Aoraki Polytechnic in Timaru have decided that they are wanting to lead the world, and by jolly Joes, they will be as well. But first of all, let's have a look at the history of how they got to where they are now. Start off really with the history of the organisation as it is in Timaru.
Well, this used to be, as I was saying just before, this used to be the site of the Timaru main school. And then Timaru Main School divided into a high school, which became in time Mountain View High, and the trades training part of the school stayed on this site, and then eventually became Aoraki Polytechnic about 30 years ago, and continued very much on the trades and community education for a number of years. In the 90s, and late 90s and early 2000s venture into other areas of training and expanded to Dunedin, Christchurch, and also through some different arrangements with private providers to the North Island. And that model was in place for about 10 years. In 2012, we became a process of reflecting and analysing how we fitted within the context of the tertiary education in New Zealand, and that was in line with government changes in the focus of tertiary education. So to align ourselves with the tertiary education strategy and also with the communities we represent, we started to change our program portfolio. So we have now increased the focus on the things that are really important to our region, such as primary industries, trades, outdoor education, hospitality, and we will continue to work through that process of ensuring that we are a key player within the communities that we represent here in South Canterbury, but also North Otago and Mid Canterbury.
So you sort of pulled your tentacles in, really. You've sort of consolidated.
Yeah, we went through like many other institutions in the 90s and early 2000s. There was a strong focus, I guess, on student numbers, yeah, and people. Most organizations tend to kind of follow the students, so many students move to Auckland, so the organizations follow with them. What we're trying to do now is to, through a network of provision, so that's all about avoiding duplication, making sure that we carve a unique place within the sector. We've been repositioning ourselves, and we want to focus on the things that are really important to our regions, which is dairy, horticulture, agriculture, and all the support services that go with it. So we deliver training in business, yeah, but we want to contextualize that to the business of primary industries. We deliver training in technology. We want to ensure that that's also contextualized to the technology that is required in the agriculture, and horticulture, dairy, water management, and so forth. We teach science, but again, we want that science to be the science of primary industries. It's really important, I think, as a tertiary provider to ensure that we are focused on the things that really matter to our region, but also aware that we are expending taxpayers' money, so we need to be responsible with the way they do this, and we've been working very closely with other providers such as CPIT, Lincoln University, the primary ITO, to avoid duplication, to ensure that if we do things once and we do it well, and that we are effective in the way that we conduct our business, so that all other taxpayers have that assurance from us that we are doing well with the resources we have available.
So it's very clever, because you basically said, we don't want to do that anymore, but we'll work with you and feed people into you, and you can feed people. You're specialising.
That's right, and it's very difficult for any organisation to do it all. Yeah? And as you know, the education sector has a wide range of programs and qualifications, and at different levels. Some of them are, very basic kind of starting point for people that perhaps just want to know whether that's the right path for them. With some other, very technologically focused, high-level, research-orientated activities. So it's very difficult for any organization to provide the whole range. Through this network of provision, we are, I believe, offering our communities the best possible education, but at the same time doing it in a way that is very effective and efficient. One of the challenges of being a small organization in a small region is that we need to be very mindful of those costs. So the changes that we went through last year, and the process that we are, renewal of our offerings is all focused on that, and ensuring that we have quality provision that is relevant, that is modern. So when we talk about agriculture, primary industries, dairy, it's not just a traditional training. We really want to focus on the technology and the science behind those. I have seen some fantastic examples in a region of robotics being introduced onto dairy sheds, for example. Well, the kind of person that we're going to be working on those machines is not the same, doesn't require the same training that they would have required 20 years ago. Yeah, so we need to make sure that we keep relevant. We provide a service, and like any service provider, you need to ensure that the services you provide them is what your industries and what your communities require.
So it's not just the students, you've gone to the industry and said, what do you want, and we will provide that.
Correct. Tertiary education in New Zealand is part of it's part of a system. The system includes the students, of course, but also employers, industry, and government. And so what we're trying to do is to ensure that we provide the training and qualifications that our communities need to ensure that our communities, our economies continue to be vibrant and exciting, and it becomes a kind of great place to live and study and work.
And it'll keep changing as the industries change, you'll change?
Absolutely, and the biggest challenge we have now is that we are training students for jobs that probably don't exist right now. So it's the sectors are changing and changing so rapidly that what we need to make sure that our students have across all of our programs, as well as the skills that they will be learning, but it's also the foundation education, it's the critical thinking, it's having that skills transferability. Yeah? When I was studying, or I guess when you were studying, the things that we probably never envisaged that we will end up, here today, you sitting there, me sitting here. Yeah, we got here through a combination of training, qualifications, life experiences, and other things. So what we want to ensure is that our students have all of those tools that then they will be able to use to kind of forge, their future. So it's not about so much the qualification that is important. Of course they're important, and that's something the students will get. But it's also the critical thinking, the problem solving, the foundation education that would allow them to work across a wide range of sectors and in a wide range of jobs.
Got to take my hat off to them. They've moved with the times and they are leaders. Well done, Aoraki Polytechnic. After the break, we're going to be talking to Warwick about things that grow. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Pete, gone mad.
Well, we've been talking a bit about it, Rob, on this program, and we've done quite a few features on it over probably the last 6 to 12 months. The demand and interest has been overwhelming, I'd have to say, and to such an extent that basically seed supplies are pretty much shot. And that's across anyone that's supplying any form of beet seed into the market. So any further seed will have to wait new harvest from Europe. So that's probably going to be later in the year, like probably towards the end of October.
So what time will that? What I'm trying to say is when you'll be able to harvest it if you're not getting the seed until October, November.
Look, it's okay. I think we're working pretty closely to schedule so that the earlier areas that require a plant will have their seed, and perhaps areas that are later, like I'm thinking further south, they don't normally plant until that sort of end of October or November, or even into December. So. That'll work quite well, but okay. Overall, we'd have to say a phenomenal response.
But an interesting thing, though, Warwick, is that okay, you've been pushing it, which is beautiful. But if it didn't work, nobody would be using it. So it's still on its own two roots, for the want of a better term.
Well, absolutely. I think basically there is no other crop that can
regularly produce in excess of 20 to 25 tonne of dry matter per annum, and can provide high quality feed, can provide high energy feed, and do that over quite a long period of time, and give the farmer a significant amount of flexibility, both in terms of whether he feeds it in situ, like grazes the crop, or if he actually decides that he's not going to do that and he's going to actually dig the crop and store it and use it at other times to supplement his feed. So it's pretty versatile, and the uptake and the interest has been overwhelming. But that's fantastic.
So next year you're going to be ordering a lot more?
Well, obviously, I think that will happen, Rob. If the uptake is like it has been, I mean, there's some people out there saying that the area potentially in beet now is equivalent to the amount of wheat that is actually planted. So we're talking sort of something like 40,000, 45,000 hectares of wheat normally grown in New Zealand, and so that's the sort of common thread that's getting thrown around at the moment.
Good on you.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about lucerne, because it's lucerne planting season looming.
Very much so, yes. Farmers should be right into the thick of that planting phase, so they should have had a soil test done, they should know what their pH is, and they should have taken some action already in terms of liming or adding some form of fertiliser. And they should be in the sort of the start of their final paddock preparation time, because you need to have a fallow period so you can control the weeds. The ideal time, I think, and certainly in the Canterbury region, they always say is ideal time for Lucerne's Christchurch show weekend. So, we're approaching that. We've only got a couple of months or so, and the level of interest is significantly higher than we've seen in the past. Coupled with that, the last autumn, of course, was pretty horrific for seed harvest of crops like lucerne.
Because of it was wet.
Yeah, and absolutely. And so there is a limit, some degree of limit around certain varieties. We're fortunate, we're okay. The Force 4s, we've got some seed, but and we've got two new ones that were bought in that we've used in Australia in the past, a couple of very good grazing tolerant varieties. So it's Force 5 and Force 7. So they've come into the market and will be available, and they're excellent performance.
That's more specifically for grazing rather than cutting for hay?
You can use them for cutting, but they were bred for really strong tolerance to grazing. So by that I mean they have a very low crown, and so therefore you can't overgraze them, and they've got very good persistence.
Okay, number 6 obviously didn't make it.
Well, of course, there are lucernes with dormancy 6, Rob, but in the current portfolio we don't have one of those. No.
That's fair enough. Chicory.
Well, this has been the farmer's friend, I think, during the spring-summer period for a number of years now. Again, an excellent quality forage, very good for live weight gains, and a lot of farmers are now using it in a range of finishing options. So they're either using it on their own, they're using it with plantain, they're using it in mixtures with grasses. But the whole chicory story needs to be looked at pretty carefully from two perspectives. One, it's a very small seed, so if farmers are looking at planting it, then don't jolly well bury it, because it'll be very hard to get a good establishment. And because it's such a small seed, you don't need a huge amount of it. Obviously, just a few kilos is enough per hectare to have an adequate, cover and a very good sward. There's no issues with animal acceptability, so the animals will eat it, eat the leaves, eat the shoots.
Even though it's bitter?
They love it. They love it. And there is no problem with getting the animals to eat chicory, none at all. And I think the other key part of chicory is it has a more rapid rate through the rumen, so it actually goes through the rumen and digests so much quicker than like some grass forage and some other forages. And by that means that you're able to actually get more through the animal in the same phase of time. And so therefore the potential for animal performance and live weight gain and is so much more enhanced as a consequence of
And
that.
it does actually get processed because things that go through quickly quite often don't.
Absolutely it does, yes. So it's just very, very palatable, and it's used from North Cape to the Bluff, basically.
It's interesting that you're using it as a main crop. I mean, you're not putting it necessarily with other things.
Well, part of that reason is that obviously weed control is still an issue with chicory, so there's only a small range of chemicals you can use to control weeds. And therefore, if you're looking for a specialist finishing crop, then I would put it on its own and manage it separately, rather than putting it in a mixed sward necessarily. Yep.
Let's look at summer and spring feed.
Well, yes, it's been a few weeks now since we've had a good rain, and some people are saying, we should be starting to push the button on the irrigators. And I know Tony Davern would be probably saying exactly the same thing.
Yep.
And I've mentioned before on this program that I think it's important, especially if we know there's potentially going to be a drought ahead. Things like forage brassicas are excellent in terms of providing that high quality feed when you've got limitations on moisture. So, farmers shouldn't overlook the opportunity to plant forage rape and summer turnips. At this time of year, you can start planting in the next, we're into spring hopefully in the next week. So, sometime late September they can get into that planting of the forage rape, and then more the summer turnip, because it's a much shorter maturity time frame. They should look at those probably closer to sort of that end of October, early November period.
Are we talking about Roundup and then?
Correct, yes. Going through either a direct drilling phase where you're going to use Roundup and you're going to basically direct drill the brassicas. They work very well by direct drilling. Or you're going through a traditional cultivation system, where you're probably going to take a little bit more time because you're going to have to try and conserve moisture as well and get a fine seed bed, because it's quite a small seed again.
Mm. I was interested when we were talking about lucerne and you said it should be fallowed, because you haven't always said that.
I think it's just something that is really good practice. Mm. If you can work the seed bed down to, and this is in a traditional cultivating sense, if you're working it down to a fine firm seed bed, then obviously if you're able to leave it like that, to allow the moisture to come up again in the soil profile, and secondly, to get a strike of weeds and be able to get rid of those weeds pre-planting, you've saved yourself significantly in terms of herbicide and potentially competition. And also, because you've allowed the moisture to come up in the soil profile, you've got a much better chance of establishment. And the reason I say that, Rob, in this particular season is if it continues to stay dry, every jolly drop of moisture that we can conserve will be valuable. In a direct drilling sense, obviously it's not the same. You've got much better moisture profile anyway, and you will have controlled the weeds by spraying, so you've got a little more flexibility there.
Is it my imagination, but if I heard somewhere that if you direct drill, it's a lovely little home for slugs?
Oh yes, well, slugs have become, I think, across certainly Canterbury and many parts of New Zealand, the #1 pest, more in autumn and winter, but to some extent in spring, across all sorts of establishing seeds. We haven't got a lot of means of control. We've only got slug bait
and heavy rollers.
And heavy rollers, but the slug bait requires a real proactive approach, and you've got to really put a lot on if they're there to get some level of control. But the normal situation, of course, is that farmers don't do that. They plant the crop and think it'll be fine, and then they wonder why there's these big patches coming up. And you go out there and have a look, and it's jolly slug damage. And the best way to approach it is to get a damp sack, lie it out on top of the paddock that you've just sown, and leave it there, and then go out in a day or two's time, lift the sack, and count the number of slugs underneath. And if you've got more than one slug under that sack, you should do something about jolly well controlling it.
So that's serious. They can wipe a crop out overnight.
Oh, absolutely. One slug can travel up a drill row 9 metres in one evening.
That's what I thought.
There you are. So
Don't go away, Warwick. I want to talk to you after the break about grasses. So we will be back with him very shortly. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Well, you're so full of information, I just couldn't let you go. Let's talk about grasses, but first of all, unbeatable, and that's not necessarily the All Blacks.
well, they were last weekend though, Rob.
Yeah,
Come on, they were.
Yeah, they were.
But certainly they weren't the weekend before.
No, we actually didn't want to own them the weekend
No,
before.
we jolly well didn't.
Nearly cost me a bottle of port.
Well, look, for listeners and farmers out there that either read the press or local magazines may have seen an ad that we put in called The Unbeatables. And there's a website you can go to called www.unbeatables.co.nz. We launched this as a site so that farmers could register, and we can get in contact with them to help them through the process of establishing a fodder beet crop. And so, we want to work with farmers to make sure it's a success for them. So that was the primary reason for doing it, and also we're going to put a lot of information on there so that it can become an ongoing means of communication to make sure that they have a successful outcome.
It is basically in that age now, aren't we? Even though some people don't have that very fast broadband.
That's true. But I mean, I'm sure people will be able to download stuff anyway, even if they've got.
So what sort of stuff you've got on there? You've got fodder beet, obviously.
We've got video clips. We've got clips of farmers themselves that have used it and how they use it, how to basically sow it, how to harvest it, a whole lot of information, basically.
Step by step growing.
Yes, and specifically, farmers that register go in obviously for a trip to go to Australia. There's a special thing on at the Sydney Opera House that decided to encourage farmers to be part of it.
I trust you're going to escort them.
Yes, well, not me personally, but it's trying to be interactive.
Yep.
We're very conscious of a new crop that takes off at quite a rate, that we want to make sure that everybody is successful with it, and we're not going to drop the bundle on it. We're going to make sure that we can work with farmers on it.
But the other thing is that your phone number's at the end of the program anyway. So
yes,
if they do want to do it on a one-on-one, because you guys will do one-on-ones, won't you?
Yeah, well, we will help. We work with the retailers. We work directly with farmers, or just to help them answer their questions. And absolutely,
No such thing as a dumb question.
you're dead right.
You talk brassicas. Let's
Yep.
swing now into grasses.
Well, for those viewers that are in the southern part of the South Island, so probably from North Otago south, spring is the key grass planting time. And that is because obviously normally their winters are pretty hard, and so autumn planting is not ideal for them. So this is a very big time. So right through central Otago Southland, a lot of pasture establishment happening. So the same rules apply as if we're planting in the autumn. Obviously, the attention to detail in terms of making sure the soil seed bed is fine and firm. If you're traditionally cultivating, there's a broad range of grasses to use, Rob. I mean, you can use ryegrass, but there's quite a significant interest in some of the alternative species, especially for sort of the harder, drier country, and a lot of hill country, likes of your cocksfords, likes of your tall fescues. They're actually, there's quite a lot of interest in those.
What happened to Lotus Maku, or Maku Lotus? Or whatever it's called?
Well, it's still around, and as a species, it's only used in really very specific situations. So it's not a common species that's used in pasture mixes.
Because it used to be flown on into the hill country and things.
That's correct.
It was the golden thing.
Yes, it was. Well, I suppose the thing that is replacing the likes of the Marco Lotus as the golden thing is subterranean clovers having a second wind. It's been around for a long time and has been used in a lot of hill country for many, many years. But we've had a lot of old varieties in the system, and we invested about 5 years ago now in a joint venture breeding program with the Australian Department of Agriculture in WA, and we've been breeding new subclover varieties that have got resistance and tolerance to an earth mite called the red-legged earth mite. Now, it's not like the tractor on the front there, but it's a little bit like that. But it's a devastating little beastie, and we've got it in New Zealand. It's been identified up through Marlborough, and that basically just takes the seedlings out. So these varieties are resistant to that, and we've got 2 new varieties out that we're getting into the market now, called Rosabrook and Narrowcup, and there'll be more to come.
Yeah, these nitrogen fix and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, and I mean the beauty of subclover is that it will tolerate dry conditions so much better than white clover because it has the ability to shut down over the middle of the summer, and it produces its seeds on the soil surface, and it actually buries the seeds. So those it's got a very high hard seed content. So a lot of those seeds won't germinate when the next rain comes along. Mm-hmm. So that's a natural mechanism for survival. So maybe the hard seed content could be even up to 50 or 60%. So therefore there's all those seeds that are sitting in the soil that if you only get a shower rain, they won't germinate. If you get a really good rain, a percentage may germinate, and maybe 30, 40% will wait for the next year. So it's a natural succession for the species.
Don't plant it where you want to rotate anything.
Oh, look, it provides phenomenal spring feed and phenomenal finishing feed for certainly for lambs. And yes, and there are different species of subterranean clover. There's species subterranean, which is the one that we all know. Then there's subspecies Yanninicum, and there's another one, subspecies Brachycalcyanum.
I'm glad you had to pronounce those rather than...
So those ones are specifically for alkaline soils or acidic soils, and they will be coming, onto the market in the future.
Very, very briefly, do they have a decent sized leaf? Because my memory is it's a very small leaf.
No, they actually have a range of leaf size. No, the leaf size is every bit as big as white clover, in some cases bigger.
Brilliant. Warwick, thank you very much indeed. After the break, if you're employing people from overseas, you will want to hear what Roddy McKinnon has to say. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Roddy, I want to talk to you about people who are employing people as milk harvesters or whatever it might be, and a fish hook if something happens to them.
Sure, we had an interesting case the other day at a Canterbury farming family, and I believe they were a dairy farm, and they rang up and they said they'd like some advice, and I made the assumption that someone had passed away and we were going to do our normal business as it were, but it turned out that they were actually employing it was a milk harvester from the Philippines into a farm management role, and it had all gone quite well. They were happy with the individual, and then a bit of a, as you mentioned, fishhook appeared. The Philippine government official that they'd been dealing with, who was assisting on the immigration process, insisted that there was a clause in the contract that if the person passed away in New Zealand, that they would be flown back to the Philippines for the family funeral at the expense of the employer, which is not normal.
Now, this is person in casket, not ashes.
That's right, and it's quite an important distinction because one is essentially a courier fee, but if we go back to the repatriating a human body, it's not a cheap exercise. And there's several things that come into play, and this particular lady rang me up and she said, well, I've got no idea what it would cost. And when I explained to her that it's not actually a cost that you can quantify in advance because there's a number of factors. First up, it depends entirely on the country that you're flying back to in terms of what their regulations for receiving deceased persons from overseas are. So that may impact the level of embalming required. It may impact the, for want of a better term, the MAF type regulations.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It'll also impact on the casket itself, what type of casket, whether it needs to be. We don't use lead-lined caskets anymore, but there are still some countries that require that the body is hermetically sealed inside a steel shipping container of some description.
And you're taking wood back into another country.
You've got a casket that may be made of a natural timber. And all of these things, and we don't know the weight of the individual because all of these things are going to go on an airline, and airlines fly with a deceased person. There's a cubic capacity type calculation, and there's also a direct weight, and so it's a cost per kilo, and it's not cheap. And it can vary dramatically from airline to airline. To give you an example, flying Air New Zealand back to Australia, which is probably our most common repatriation, at around about $12, $13 a kilo. Now that doesn't sound expensive until you work out that the average human being or male in New Zealand is probably around about 85 or 90 kilos. Casket's going to be another 30 kilos, plus the liners, etc., cardboard wrapping, a pallet to put them on. All of a sudden you could be pushing 150, 160 kilos. So just a one-way flight may be, from Auckland perhaps, $1,500 to $2,000 by the time you do the paperwork. If you're going to somewhere like the Philippines, that number can triple or quadruple quite easily. And in fact, I was quoted the other day, we were looking at a repatriation back to the Middle East, and by time, and this was through Air Emirates, by the time it went through 3 airports and all the handling charges, they were talking well over $50 a kilo. And so all of a sudden there was a bill there for the family, just a one-way trip of $9,000 or $10,000.
That's just the transport.
That's just the transport. And then you've got, obviously, funeral directors' costs in New Zealand to do all of this work. You've got, we use a freight forwarder. They have got to do all the export documentation. They charge around about $300, $400 to do that. You've got time, handling fees, and then you've got the other end as well. The funeral director may not actually come to the airport until they're paid to collect. We've had situations where we've had to send a credit card details over so the funeral director can swipe it before he'll actually get into his vehicle and drive. You don't know what the cultural considerations are going to be. And so rightly, when this person rang up and said, well, ooh, this looks bad, to a certain extent it is. So our advice is two things that they can look at. Is first up, we're happy to give them an estimate if they know where the country the person's coming from. We're happy to give them an idea of what it would cost to go back there, okay? Because we've dealt with a lot of countries.
Estimate, Roddy.
Yes, estimate. And we can, that's free. We just do that as a public service, really, because I think it's something that we all need to know. Second thing is that when you're dealing with these situations and you're not sure what it's going to cost, it might be advisable to speak to an insurance broker to buy a policy for that person, for that individual, and then put that as part of their benefits package. And that way you don't have to come up with a lump sum, but if the unforeseen does happen, then potentially you're covered up to, say, $20,000. And that wouldn't be a particularly expensive life insurance policy either.
I've actually checked that out a wee bit, and some of them are very hesitant to get involved with a short-term life insurance policy. So people are going to have to shop around a wee bit on that one.
They absolutely are, and you're absolutely right. I've just dealt with my own insurances now, and to be honest, they don't like giving money away, and they don't like giving money away if they think they're not going to get a period of time of premiums. So perhaps some sort of liability cover based on the farmer itself might be the way to go.
Because you started off by saying the contract said. Now, it's probably exceedingly small print. It may not necessarily be in English, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, and so that's what a person who's employing somebody from overseas should take a contract, give it to Harmons or whoever, and say
Absolutely.
go through it with a fine-tooth comb.
I would look for those particular fishhooks, because if it says you are responsible for repatriation of any deceased, it may not necessarily, the person may not have died. Are you responsible for the repatriation of an injured worker? So I don't know, a cow sits on them. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
But they
things
can't
happen
work
on
any
farms.
further, and they expect to go home. They want to go home for their family. All right, and it's ACC's not going to fly them home. So these are the kinds of things that are coming up now. We're a global society with global employees in New Zealand now, and we really need to anticipate.
Farming's become like a state of nations. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Absolutely. I've got friends out in Darfield who've, in this very situation, they've employed people from Chile. And so they've got a different set of regulations that they're dealing with there. And the South Americans, they've invented red tape.
They invented it, did they?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, take-home message is it can get exceedingly expensive.
Yes.
You've got to work out something, and well, with your lawyers, I guess, for the
Pretty
contract.
much. If you're going to take the responsibility on, it would behoove you to have an idea what the cost will be. We're happy to help with that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a cost, and it's not going to be cheaper than $10,000.
Well, luckily, your phone number's at the end of the program, which is actually now. So have a look for Roddy's phone number on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you have just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.